she would get up at 4 in the morning so that she could start her dialing all the different ones who were in
Oh.
Congress to get them to decide we should have this day of prayer.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast. I'm Bruce C.E. Fleming, Executive Director of the Tru316 Foundation. Our website is tru316.com, and this is the Eden Podcast. We have a special guest with us today, and that is Judy. She is Judy Douglass, and Judy was our special recipient of the Tru316 Award this past March 16.
I was so honored.
And we were so thrilled to give it to you, Judy. Joy and I were just very pleased. And the people who talked about your life, your ministry, and you shared your heart, very, very exciting. And we'd like people to go back and check that out. It's on the Eden Podcast on our Tru316 YouTube channel and also on the podcast. But Judy has a new book out. I'm not surprised. Judy has written a lot of things. There it is. So it's called Her Calling, Our Legacy. And what's the subtitle?
The subtitle is Pioneer Women of Cru.
Pioneer Women of Cru. So you knew a lot of those women personally.
Most of them.
Mentored a lot of them, I assume.
And got mentored by some of them.
Okay, so now there's 15 stories in that first book, and the first one intrigues me an awful lot. That is the story of Vonette Bright. Can you tell us about Vonette?
Oh, can I tell you about Vonette? That would take all the time we have, but I'll try to condense it.
Okay.
I first met Vonette when I went to my first conference at Arrowhead Springs, our headquarters back then, and was just a student, excited to know the Lord and to walk with him. And Vonette was around, and I got to know her. And then when I joined staff, I was at our headquarters to do a magazine, and she kind of took an interest in me. And then I ended up marrying Bill's next in command, Steve Douglass. And so then she took me under her wing in another way because she was going to mentor me to do the job that she had been doing. And she was a very strong woman. She cared a lot for people, and she also had some really definite opinions on some things and was bold to do things. And I'm sure she challenged Bill Bright some, but he encouraged her. Even though they were pretty much in a traditional kind of marriage, and she considered Mrs. Bill Bright her most important title, and wanted to just serve him and do whatever would help him be the person that God made him to be. But he kept saying, you have more to offer. You have more to offer, which I have always appreciated because he said that to me too. And Vonette just at first was just helping in any way she could. She's a good organizer, a good make things happen kind of person. But as we moved our headquarters to Arrowhead Springs, and that's when I first got involved, she got there, and at first she kind of was in charge of revamping the old hotel into something. But then that was done, and people started coming to fill all the roles. And she's like, now what do I do? And Dr. Bright said, I think prayer is your thing. Why don't you see about prayer?
Wow.
And from there, she started a prayer campaign within Cru, which had already emphasized it a lot. And then she got involved with the Lausanne Committee and their prayer ministry that they had, and eventually became the head of the Great Commission Prayer Crusade that came out of Lausanne. And she led that, but she took it a lot broader than that because she just knew how to get people together. She could call any Christian leader's wife and say, we're going to have a gathering to talk about how we can get people praying more. And they came. And she had people who had influence easily. She was just good at that.
Mhm.
And um, she just kept doing that. It was amazing to watch how God used her and how prayer became one of the high priorities in the Christian world at that time. To how are we going to reach the world? How do we make a difference? Well, we start with prayer. And she was God's choice for that time to really emphasize that.
One of my early discoveries as a growing Christian was I came across the verses, "You have not because you ask not." You know, there are so many things that aren't going on because the Lord's been waiting for us to ask. And I was privileged to be there at that Lausanne Congress and see how the Lord was just moving, in so many different ways. Just amazing.
Oh,
So
he
I
was,
didn't,
and he continues to use Lausanne in that way.
yeah, yeah. So the Great Commission Prayer Crusade was a ministry that came out of Lausanne, and it had international scope too, right?
It did. Like she went to Korea, which of course is a place where there's a lot of prayer
Yeah,
anyway.
yes.
But I was there with her one time in Korea when we went up on one of their prayer mountains.
Uh,
And we had, I don't know, several hundred women from all over Asia and a few from the United States who'd come. And it was 3 days of fasting and prayer.
wow.
And who knows what all came as a
Yeah,
result, because
yeah,
it's hard to track what God does in response to prayer
yeah. The
a
Lord
lot
was
of time.
listening. Yeah.
And
Now then there wasn't such a thing back then, but there came to be one, which we now know as the National Day of Prayer. And how did the Lord use her and the president back then?
well, she's always committed to prayer. Her son, Brad, at that time was working for a senator from Colorado and on his staff team there. And she looked around and she said, "We have got to get a day that this whole country will come together for prayer." And so she said to Brad, "How do I do that? What do I do to make something happen?" There it was a law passed back decades, years before, that said that the president could declare a day of prayer each year,
Hmm.
but there was no set day of prayer. And so she was campaigning to get it set for one specific date, the first Thursday in May, and which is about when they usually did something, but there wasn't a lot of organization to it before. And a president could declare it, and some people honored it and others didn't. But she got up, she lived in California. The senators and congressmen are in Washington. And Brad says she would get up at 4 in the morning so that she could start her dialing all the different ones who were in
Oh.
Congress to get them
Yeah.
to decide we should have this day of prayer.
Mhm.
The first Thursday in May every year, it
Yeah.
would be assigned and named that as a day of prayer for the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
And so she got it. She
Yeah.
was able to get them to do it. Again, having a son who was working in Washington with Congress helped. But it was her passion and her persistence that made it happen. And I, every year then after that, for until she handed it over to Shirley Hinkson, which was like 8 or 10 years later, um, not Shirley Hinkson, I'm sorry, Shirley Dobson. And sure, so what we would do is go in and they would, the night before, have a congressional gathering, usually for all who wanted to come.
Mhm.
And I was able to go with her on one of those, and that was kind of exciting. We also have a picture from when George W. Yeah, George W. was president, and they're in rows and seated in chairs, and George is in the chair right in front of her, and he's got his hand around holding her hand
Uh,
as they're praying, and it just took off, and many organizations and many churches really began to make it important
mm,
for their people to come together and pray on that day for our nation.
Mhm.
And I imagine there were a lot who prayed this last May. And so that's how it happened. It was basically Vonette made it happen.
Yeah,
Now, God was gracious and led her to people. She had a man from the Senate and a man from the House who were able to make it come together.
sure.
But it was her persistence
Yeah,
and her prayer constantly that
yeah,
God would do this.
yeah. So we believe in that in our household. My mother-in-law and my wife and my daughter, they've all been involved in regular organized prayer and prayer lists and answers to prayer, and we just see God answering prayer over and over again. So that's really special. I'm glad she's in that book. Now, there's another thing in the book that you talk about, and that was a time that she saw in an airport the big time CBS news anchor. Can you tell us the story? What happened there?
So she and Bill were transitioning in Chicago airport to come home, and she saw Walter Cronkite walking by, and he was very recognizable at that time. And so she knew that there was a gathering occurring in the next day or two that would be televised that was basically not pro-life. And they were trying to make it so that abortions were okay. And so she saw him and she says, I've got to talk to him. And Bill said, honey, maybe he said, honey, but she said, honey, he would have said, my love. Uh,
So, but Cronkite was going to be on a pro-abortion. He was going to come out in favor of
yes,
it. Yeah.
but he was just, it was not that was real committed. He just was, yes, I'll be on it with you. It wasn't a big deal to him.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But she went running after him down the uh, ramp there at O'Hara uh, Airport and stopped him. And she said, Mr. Cronkite, I know you realize how impactful you are, what an incredible following you have, and how whatever you say, people agree with and listen to, and you don't know who I am. But she said, I know that you're going to be on that panel. And I just want to say, if you back abortion, then that's what people will do. But if you would come out for the value of life and be pro-life, then that's what people will decide to do. And she said, I had no idea what he would do until the next night, and he didn't even show up. He decided not to be on it.
Wow. Wow. So her influence, she was up on things, she knew what was going on, and she saw the occasion, she took it. Yeah. Yeah.
She did. And again, with lots of love and care, but a lot of boldness and starchiness too.
Mhm. Well, we know she liked you. She cared for you. She loved you, and you did so
She
many
did
things
love
together.
me, and I
Yeah.
felt so blessed. And
Yeah.
she was, when Steve was named the next president, she was just thrilled and happy for him, but also for me,
Yeah.
and committed to helping me step into that position.
So help me review. Steve was what was his title with Crusade then at the end there?
Steve,
The last
who?
20 years? Yeah.
My husband?
Yes.
At the end, he was the president emeritus. He served for 20 years as president.
So, but he was president of Campus Crusade for Christ International.
Yes,
Yeah. And he encouraged you, and you ended up organizing something you're still leading today. What's that called? Women's Resources. What?
Women's Resources.
Yeah.
It's called Women's Resources because we needed a name. And in Cru, there are ministries and there are resources. And they didn't really want a women's ministry. They wanted it to be integrated more than that, so
Uh-huh.
that the women and the men are doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but he was very encouraging to me. Well, actually, Bill, Vonetta, and Steve were all encouraging as I started to look for ways that we could minister to our staff women. Not as much in the US. They were pretty able and cared for and and very engaged.
Mhm.
But around the world, the women often didn't have a big picture of how they could contribute well and
Mhm.
that they would be valued for that, depending on the place. But and they very seldom had new technology. The men were always in charge of pretty near everything, and they were thrilled to do what we do in Cru, win people to Jesus, build them in their faith, and send them out to help reach the world. But we were committed to doing some things to help our women around the world um, make a difference. And we started with just a website and began to write articles to encourage them, have people tell their stories, and look for the ways that they could begin to step up. There were issues like the women didn't have transportation a lot of places.
Mhm.
Um, and it our ministry was growing rapidly in Africa and parts of Asia. And so we were just wanted to help them open their eyes that God might have ways to use them that fit with where they were in the culture they were a part of, and yet that He had very great ways to introduce them. And we have about four of those stories in this book. There'll be more in volume two.
Okay, so let's
Um,
focus in on one of them. What's her name is Marilyn,
Marilyn, yes. Now, she's not one of the Asian ones, though, or she's an American,
but you talked
but
about
she's,
technology. I'm interested in that part. Yeah.
yes, Marilyn tells in the story, her story,
What's her
about
last
how long,
what's her last name?
pardon,
What's her last name?
Adamson,
Mary Ennis. Okay.
Adamson,
Uh-huh.
Adamson.
Uh-huh.
And Marilyn went through a long time not knowing the Lord in high school and college. And her parents were not believers, and she just didn't see why she should believe. But she was very committed to understanding things. And so when a friend started to talk to her about the Lord, she said, "Well, you just have to prove that to me." Well, it took several years, but she finally came to decide this is real.
Mhm.
This is Jesus is real,
Mhm.
and He makes a difference, and He wants to be in my life. And oh, she was totally committed because it had taken her 3 years of studying and reading to come to the conclusion that this is the real thing. Now, her parents weren't real happy about it, but she did everything she could in later part of high school and then in college. She went where she thought God wanted her to go and got involved with the Campus Crusade ministry on her campus and was challenged one summer to go to one of our summer projects. And I don't even remember what country, but it was in a long way away country. And she went there and just was amazed at how open people were and how responsive they were to know the Lord and to let Him guide their lives. And so she came back and she was majoring in marketing. And toward her last year, as she was thinking of marketing and she was seeing what happens in marketing and getting a bigger picture of it, she said, "I don't want to sell candy or toilet paper or whatever." She says, "I want people to know Jesus."
Yes.
And so then she said, "Lord, here I am. What do you want me to do?" And He sent her to Cru, and she joined our staff, and she started working in what would be close to a marketing thing, a publication, a publishing, and promotional things to reach people. And she just got a picture at one point that if you could talk to people anywhere in the world and let them see what Christ has meant in your life and see what He offers them, then many of them would respond. So she started to write articles and publish them on what was the beginning internet at that time. And and found that people were interested. And it just exploded from there. And she ended up starting something called everystudent.com. And it's all over the world now. It's in dozens of languages,
Mm.
and they have hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and posts on how to know Christ, how to walk with him, how to, you know, get forgiven for your sins or a sin, just everything that anyone would we need to know. And she's the mastermind behind it, and she had to convince all the U.S. people that this was a good thing. U.S. always thinks they're ahead of everybody, at least in our ministry. They have, not as much anymore. And so from that, this everystudent.com is maybe reaches more people than almost anything that's out there because it's in language for the countries that it's going to. And we have people in our countries around there who are using that as a jumping off place to talk to people about Jesus.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's great. Yeah.
It is wonderful.
Yeah.
Tru316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to tru316.com/partner. Tru316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new Tru partner who gives to the Tru316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our Tru school workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the Tru316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our Tru partners. Please join now by going to tru316.com/partner.